know what we wouldn't have found if we would have stayed on the trail. The waterfall, the cliff. What is that?
I saw someone. I did. I saw someone.
My country, 'tis of thee.
It's a story people know but don't talk about. Except in whispers, like a ghost story.
Sweet land of liberty.
We don't bother them. And they don't bother us.
Of thee I sing.
But anyone who goes up there, what is this place?
Hello, Wrong Turn is directed by Mike P. Nelson and written by Alan McElroy, and superficially appears to be a reboot of the horror franchise which began way back in 2003 with the original Wrong Turn that was also written by McElroy and starred Eliza Dushku, who was at the time fresh from her success as Faith in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and its spin-off series Angel. When I heard that there was a new version of Wrong Turn being made and due for release this year, I sort of rolled my eyes a bit like that, and I despaired at the fact that Hollywood is so bereft of new ideas that it had resorted to rebooting very minor horror franchises which started less than 20 years ago. A Wrong Turn, as I recall, and I haven't seen it for years, was an enjoyable enough sort of slasher horror film about a group of teenagers who take a wrong turn while they're taking a vacation in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia, and they find themselves coming under the scrutiny of a bunch of rather unpleasant sort of mutant deformed cannibals who, in the scheme of things and in the nature of these sorts of films, pick them off one by one. It's not a bad film. I remember seeing it in the cinema. I've seen it again since on DVD. Not necessarily felt inclined to watch it again, but I am aware that it spawned a number of straight-to-DVD sequels, one of them as recently as 2014, so it's a series that sort of kept itself going, and I think I've seen one or two of the sequels, but they sort of haven't really stuck in my mind. But as I say, when I heard that we've got a reboot coming, I thought, well, has it really come to this? But having watched the film, it isn't quite what I thought it was going to be, because what McElroy has done, he's taken the idea, the title Wrong Turn, and he's looked creatively at what else he could do with that idea without just repeating himself, without telling the same story. The core of the story is obviously very, very similar in that it's about a bunch of kids led by Charlotte Vega, Emma Dumont, Aidan Bradley and others whose names roll off the tongue, who are once again going on a trip into West Virginia, into the Appalachians, I think. But they encounter a rather different menace up in the mountains. It's not mutated cannibal creatures or deformed crossbreed creatures. But what they come across there is something a little bit more sinister and a bit more in the vein of, say, Wicker Man. They come across this sort of cult, this society which calls itself the Foundation, which lives under tenets to do with sort of witchcraft and rituals and sacrifice and so on. They cut themselves off from society and they live by their own rules. And in that way, they're probably a much more palpable and terrifying threat than, mutants and creatures which are a little bit removed from reality, because the people that the group encounter out in the woods are normal people, apparently. Well, there's a very charismatic leader of the group who explains how they live and why they live that way, and he takes a particular fancy to Jen, who's one of the survivors of the group. It's no surprise to reveal that several of the group of teens get killed in quite gruesome manners. One in particular involving a log rolling down a hill that will make you squeal like a baby, because it's very unpleasant. But no, the leader of this group takes a fancy to Jen, and she's sort of captured with her boyfriend Darius and a few others who've survived. I won't spoil it by telling you who lives and dies. But it's interesting. It's an interesting take on familiar. We know we've seen all these cabin in the woods type things, and these people wandering in the woods being attacked by psychopaths and killers and mutants and murderers. So in a certain respects, this isn't anything particularly new, but I think it's interesting that the original creator of the series has gone back to the well and thought about what else he could do with this. Instead of just remaking the original film, he's put a different spin on it, and I did appreciate the fact that he'd done that. And also, what also works in this particular film, that it has an extra dimension, because Jen's father Scott, who's played by Matthew Modine, its film actually starts with him on the road searching for Jen, because she's sort of fallen off grid. He can't get hold of her, she won't reply to his calls, and he's obviously worried about what's happened to her, and he's looking for her. So you've got that other thread in the film about him and his quest to find Jen and her friends, and what happens if and when he does, and what's happened to them, and what happens afterwards. Again, without giving too much away, the film does the usual horror trick of apparently ending, but having a little coda, which takes you away from the original concept to an extent, and adds something a little bit more. And this is where I felt the film stood out a little bit, because it reaches its conclusion, and in a fairly predictable sort of way, you know who's going to live and who's going to die, and where it's going to go. But it's interesting, because the idea of this Foundation Society is quite unnerving, because they're not monsters. As I say, they're just normal people who have a certain belief, and that's the way they want to live their life, and that's interesting. It makes it a bit more interesting than, more fanciful monsters. But what I particularly liked about this film is the coda, where, again, I won't spoil it, but the film ends with a really, really well done static shot. It's hard to talk about it without spoiling it, but it's very nicely done. It sort of frames something that's happening, and then other things happen in that frame without the camera moving. There's no close-ups, there's no cutting. It's just the camera focusing on movement and action and incident in the last few minutes, which brings the film to an end as the credits start to roll. And I thought that was quite striking. So that's Wrong Turn, the new version of Wrong Turn. As I say, is out now on physical media. You can find it on streaming services as well. It doesn't rewrite the horror book. It doesn't rewrite the rules. But what it does do, which I'm pleased it did, is tell a slightly different story from the Wrong Turn that we saw back in 2003 and have seen ever since. It's the sort of film that at the end of the year you might think, oh, I remember watching that. It's not going to stay in the mind particularly long, but I think it's interesting, and it's far better than I suspected it was going to be. As I said, I was just expecting a lazy retread of the original, but it's not. Some thought has gone into doing something a little bit different and surprising the audience, and it did surprise me, and I rather enjoyed it. So I'm going to give Wrong Turn, a big old-fashioned world of stuff, 7 out of 10. As I said, it's available now if you want to have a look. If you've watched it, why not let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below, as they say. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm trying to build my subscriber base up, slowly but surely. Let me know what you thought of this video, what you thought of the film, and if you've got any ideas of other things you'd like me to talk about. There's more Doctor Who content coming soon. There's more film reviews and bits and pieces, book reviews. So yeah, subscribe, like, and I'll see you all soon.